The neighborhood had always been quiet, a place where families felt safe, where everyone knew their neighbors. But tonight, that illusion was shattered. Police cars lined the street, officers moved methodically, and neighbors whispered behind closed doors. The camera focuses on the house at the center of it all, where a distraught woman sits on the porch, her hands trembling as she buries her face. Her muffled sobs are the only sound against the backdrop of flashing lights. She thought her husband was cheating, late nights, secretive phone calls, and unexplained absences. All the signs were there, the evasive answers, the locked drawer in the garage, the receipts from unfamiliar locations. But what she uncovered was far worse than she could have imagined. Behind the facade of a loving husband, father, and neighbor lurked a monster. A man whose carefully constructed double life unraveled under the weight of his own darkness. It began innocently enough. She noticed his absences growing longer. His explanations didn't add up. The late-night phone calls, the sudden need to leave the house, the erratic behavior, all of it pointed to one conclusion: infidelity. She confronted him, but he denied everything, brushing off her concerns with practiced ease. Still, her instincts told her something wasn't right. Her suspicions drove her to investigate. She went through his pockets, finding receipts from places she didn't recognize. She checked his phone, but it was always locked. Then she found it, the drawer in the garage he kept locked. She'd seen him open it before, always glancing over his shoulder to make sure no one was watching. One night, when he was gone longer than usual, she broke the lock. What she found wasn't proof of an affair. It was evidence of something far more sinister. Each item she pulled out added to the horrifying picture taking shape in her mind. The IDs were of missing women. The photos were chillingly candid, showing women laughing, walking, and going about their lives, oblivious to the camera. And then there were the notes, scrawled plans, locations, and dates. It was as if she had opened a window into his twisted mind. Her hands shook as she dialed 911. How could this be true? The man she had loved, the father of her children, how could he be capable of such evil? She tried to push the thought from her mind, clinging to the hope that there was some explanation, that she was misunderstanding what she saw. But deep down, she knew the truth. When the police arrived, the pieces began to fall into place. The items in the drawer were just the tip of the iceberg. A search of the house revealed more. Blood-stained clothing hidden in the attic, a collection of souvenirs from his victims, and a journal detailing his crimes. The man she thought she knew had been living a double life for years, hiding in plain sight. The community was stunned. Neighbors who had exchanged pleasantries with him at the mailbox, who had invited him to barbecues, who had trusted him around their children, now found themselves questioning everything. How could they have missed the signs? How could a man so ordinary, so unremarkable, be capable of such horrific acts? As the investigation unfolded, the scope of his crimes became clear. He had targeted women across multiple states, using his charm and unassuming demeanor to gain their trust. He was careful, methodical, leaving no trace that could link him to the crimes. Till now. Welcome to CrimeByte, your window into the darkest corners of human behavior. Here we explore the cases that defy explanation, revealing the horrifying truths that often hide in plain sight. Our mission is to shine a light on these stories, to uncover the details that others overlook, and to give voice to the victims whose stories demand to be told. In this episode, we bring you the chilling tale of a woman whose search for the truth unraveled a nightmare beyond comprehension. Her story is one of betrayal, horror, and resilience, a reminder that evil often wears the mask of normalcy. At CrimeByte, we don't just tell stories, we seek to understand them. What drives a person to commit unthinkable acts? How do they hide in plain sight for years? And what does their exposure teach us about vigilance, justice, and the strength of the human spirit? These are the questions we aim to answer. Follow us to enjoy by clicking on like and subscribing to this channel. Stay with us as we uncover the shocking truth behind this story and explore the twisted double life of a man who hid his crimes behind the walls of his own home. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell to join us for more gripping true crime stories. This is CrimeByte, where the truth comes to light. To the outside world, they were the perfect family. A loving husband, a caring wife, two bright-eyed children, and a home that radiated warmth and stability. Their suburban life seemed like something from a postcard, quiet, secure, and enviable. Friends and neighbors admired their bond, often commenting on how they seemed to have it all. But appearances can be deceiving, and beneath the polished surface, cracks were beginning to form. It started subtly, with small changes in the husband's behavior. He began coming home later than usual, brushing off her concerns with vague excuses about work or errands that couldn't wait. His phone, once casually left on the counter, was now guarded as if it held state secrets. Unanswered questions piled up, and with them, a growing sense of unease settled over their once happy home. At first, she thought she was imagining it. She told herself it was just a phase, that everyone goes through periods of distance in their relationships. But the nagging feeling refused to leave her alone. It was as if a shadow had crept into their home, dimming the light of their once bright connection. She began to watch him more closely, noting every unexplained absence, every suspicious glance at his phone, every hurried excuse that left her with more questions than answers. The doubts gnawed at her, consuming her thoughts. Was he cheating? The evidence seemed to point in that direction, but something about his behavior didn't add up. His absences were too frequent, his excuses too flimsy, and yet there was a darkness in his eyes that went beyond guilt. It was as if he was carrying a burden too heavy to share. From the outside, their life remained picture perfect. But inside the walls of their home, the illusion was beginning to crumble. The wife, driven by a need for answers, began to dig deeper into the cracks, not realizing that what she was about to uncover would shatter her world entirely. What would her search for the truth uncover? It started with the little things. A forgotten receipt tucked into his jacket pocket, unfamiliar phone numbers written on scraps of paper, charges on their credit card statement for long drives to places she had never heard of. Each discovery seemed insignificant on its own, but together, they painted a picture that she couldn't ignore. Her doubts turned into paranoia as the clues began to mount. She found tools in the garage that didn't belong to a handyman. Ropes, duct tape, and gloves neatly packed in a box hidden behind old holiday decorations. She discovered a locked drawer in his office, its contents inaccessible but taunting her with their secrecy. And then there were the long, unexplained absences. The late-night drives that left her lying awake, consumed by thoughts of where he might be. Every piece of evidence added to her growing fear that something was terribly wrong. But what was she looking for? She wanted to believe that her suspicions were unfounded, that the explanations were innocent. Yet her gut told her otherwise. The man she had married, the father of her children, was hiding something. And she couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't just infidelity. The key was small, almost unassuming, but it unlocked a door she wasn't ready to open. It led her to the hidden lockbox, the secrets of which would forever change her understanding of the man she thought she knew. Could her worst fears even begin to match the truth? Inside were items that no loving husband should possess. IDs of women she didn't recognize, their smiling faces staring back at her from the photographs. Notes scribbled in his handwriting, detailing dates and locations. A knife with a polished blade, its edges still sharp. Each item felt like a piece of a nightmare she couldn't wake up from. The truth was more horrifying than she could have imagined. This wasn't evidence of an affair. It was evidence of a predator. The man she had loved, trusted, and built a life with had been living a double life. And now, the secrets he had worked so hard to hide were laid bare before her. Her accusations of infidelity turned into a desperate call to law enforcement. She handed over the evidence, her hands shaking as she recounted her discovery. The police wasted no time, their search revealing even more than she had found. Clothes stained with blood, journals detailing his crimes, and a collection of trophies taken from his victims. How many lives had he destroyed in his hidden double life? The wife's discovery was just the beginning. What began as suspicions of infidelity had cracked open the door to something far darker. The evidence she handed over to the police wasn't just incriminating, it was damning. Each item told a story of a meticulous predator who had operated in the shadows for years, leaving a trail of destruction behind him. Detectives knew they were dealing with more than just a domestic dispute. The IDs, the photographs, and the maps pointed to something sinister, missing persons cases that had remained unsolved for years. The man at the center of it all had been living a double life, using the facade of an ordinary husband and father to mask his monstrous activities. As investigators dug deeper, they uncovered a disturbing pattern. The victims, all women, had been carefully chosen. They shared physical similarities, young, independent, and often living alone. The locations of their disappearances formed a trail that spanned multiple states, each crime meticulously planned and executed. The husband's journals provided chilling insight into his methods. He had stalked his victims for weeks, learning their routines, noting their vulnerabilities, and ensuring that he left no evidence behind. His notes were methodical, almost clinical, detailing everything from their daily habits to the time he intended to strike. But the question that haunted investigators was how he had managed to evade justice for so long. Despite the clear connections between the crimes, there had been no physical evidence linking him to the scenes. He had been careful, covering his tracks and exploiting gaps in communication between law enforcement agencies. His background as a seemingly ordinary family man had shielded him, allowing him to slip under the radar. Detectives worked tirelessly to connect the dots. They re-examined cold cases, comparing evidence from crime scenes to the items found in his possession. DNA testing, once an impossibility due to degraded samples, now provided a crucial breakthrough. A single hair found on a victim's clothing matched the husband's DNA, tying him directly to a crime he thought had been buried forever. The evidence began to mount, each piece reinforcing the horrific reality that this man had led a life of violence and deception. His victims had been silenced, their stories left untold until now. As the investigation unfolded, the sheer scale of his crimes became apparent. He had operated undetected for over a decade, leaving a trail of grief and unanswered questions in his wake. The detectives knew they had to act quickly. Every moment he remained free was a potential threat to another life. But bringing him to justice required more than evidence. It required precision, timing, and absolute certainty. Would investigators find the evidence they needed to bring him down? After weeks of surveillance, the time had come. The husband's every move had been tracked, his routines studied, and his behavior analyzed. The evidence against him was overwhelming, and now the only step left was to bring him in. Inside, the husband sat at the kitchen table, unaware of the storm about to descend. He was drinking coffee, reading the morning news, and preparing for another day of maintaining his facade. But the sound of heavy footsteps outside and the knock at the door broke his routine. The arrest was swift and calculated. The husband opened the door, his demeanor quickly shifting as he saw the armed officers waiting. He raised his hands, his face blank, offering no resistance as they placed him in handcuffs. The man who had once terrorized countless women now stood silent, his double life unraveling in front of him. For the community, the arrest was a seismic event. The man they had trusted, who had waved at them from across the street and hosted barbecues in his backyard, was now revealed to be a predator. The betrayal cut deep, leaving residents questioning how they could have missed the signs. Inside the house, police found even more evidence. Hidden compartments revealed additional trophies from his victims, jewelry, clothing, and personal items that he had kept as grim reminders of his crimes. The discoveries painted an even darker picture of a man who had thrived on control, manipulation, and the suffering of others. As the news of his arrest spread, questions began to emerge. Why had he done it? What had driven him to commit such heinous acts? And perhaps most chillingly, how many more victims were out there, waiting to be discovered? In the interrogation room, the husband remained stoic, refusing to answer questions or offer explanations. His silence only deepened the mystery, leaving investigators to piece together his motives from the evidence he left behind. The arrest marked the end of his reign of terror, but it was only the beginning of a long journey toward justice. For the victims' families, it brought a sense of relief, but also reopened wounds that had never fully healed. The man who had stolen so much from so many was finally in custody, but the full extent of his crimes had yet to be revealed. What secrets would his interrogation reveal? The man behind the mask was finally exposed, but understanding him required more than just evidence. Psychologists, criminologists, and detectives embarked on an exhaustive journey to unravel his psyche. a journey that revealed a chilling portrait of a predator who had mastered the art of deception. Forensic psychologists were immediately struck by his ability to blend into society. He wasn't the kind of criminal who lurked in the shadows or exuded menace. Instead, he was friendly, polite, and deeply ingrained in his community. His ordinary appearance was his greatest weapon, enabling him to move undetected for years. Experts identified key traits that marked him as a predator. He exhibited a need for control and dominance, which manifested in his meticulously planned crimes. His journals revealed a disturbing level of organization, with entries describing victims' habits, vulnerabilities, and detailed plans of attack. Each crime was not an impulsive act, but a calculated performance designed to satisfy his twisted desires. Psychologists theorized that his compulsions stemmed from unresolved trauma and deep-seated feelings of inadequacy. Early interviews with family members hinted at a troubled childhood, abuse, neglect, and a lack of emotional connection. These factors likely shaped a man who sought to assert control where he felt powerless. But there was more to his psyche than control. He derived pleasure from the suffering of others, a hallmark of psychopathy. His crimes weren't just about power, they were about feeding a need to dominate and instill fear. Each act reinforced his belief that he was untouchable, a feeling that grew stronger with every successful attack. His ability to evade detection also spoke to his cunning. He carefully selected his victims, ensuring they had little connection to him. He exploited gaps in law enforcement communication, often committing crimes in different jurisdictions to avoid detection. And he adapted. When technology advanced, so did his methods, ensuring he always stayed one step ahead of investigators. The forensic analysis of his journals provided a chilling glimpse into his mind. Each entry revealed not only his plans, but his emotions, or lack thereof. He wrote about his victims with cold detachment, reducing them to objects in his twisted narrative. The level of detail was staggering, suggesting that he relived each crime repeatedly in his mind. Yet despite his meticulous planning, his capture revealed cracks in his facade. Psychologists noted that his decision to keep trophies, photographs, IDs, and personal items was his undoing. These items were both his greatest source of pride and his Achilles heel, providing the evidence needed to convict him. The husband's duality, the caring neighbor and the ruthless predator, forced society to confront uncomfortable truths. How many others like him were hiding in plain sight, and what warning signs had been missed along the way? Could unmasking his motives provide the tools to identify and stop future predators before they strike? Behind every crime is a life stolen, a family shattered, and a community left to grieve. For the victims of the husband's crimes, justice came too late. Their stories, however, refused to be silenced. The trial gave families and survivors a platform to share their experiences, ensuring that the victims were more than just names in a case file. Each testimony painted a vivid picture of a life full of promise, abruptly cut short by his actions. Survivors of his attacks also came forward, their courage inspiring countless others to break their silence. They recounted the moments of terror when they realized they were being hunted, the fear that followed them long after the attacks, and the strength it took to reclaim their lives. Each story was a testament to resilience. These women refused to let their trauma define them. Instead, they used their experiences to advocate for change, pushing for stronger laws and better support systems for victims of violent crime. The victims' families also played a crucial role in shaping the narrative. Their grief, though overwhelming, fueled their fight for justice. They demanded accountability, not just from the husband, but from the systems that had failed to connect the dots sooner. Their advocacy led to changes in how law enforcement agencies communicate and share information, ensuring that future predators would find it harder to slip through the cracks. As their voices grew louder, they transformed the case from one focused on a predator to one centered on the people he hurt. They reminded the world that his crimes weren't just about him. They were about the lives he destroyed and the legacies he tried to erase. Could their courage inspire a new era of advocacy and justice for victims everywhere? The trial was more than a legal proceeding. It was a nationwide spectacle. The courtroom became a theater of justice, where every detail of the husband's life and crimes was laid bare. It wasn't just about convicting a predator. It was about understanding how someone so seemingly ordinary could commit such extraordinary acts of violence. Inside, the atmosphere was tense. Journalists filled every available seat. Victims' families sat quietly, their faces a mix of grief and determination, and the jury listened intently, knowing the weight of their responsibility. The prosecution meticulously built their case, presenting a mountain of evidence that painted a chilling picture of a man who had spent years perfecting his craft. They began with his journals, which detailed his crimes with an almost clinical precision. Each entry was a blueprint for terror, outlining the steps he took to stalk, trap, and ultimately destroy his victims. Prosecutors also presented physical evidence, including DNA, that tied him to multiple crime scenes. Witnesses testified about his strange behavior, his sudden absences, and the chilling trophies he kept from his victims. Each piece of evidence was another nail in his coffin, leaving little doubt about his guilt. But the most powerful moments came from the victims' families, who took the stand to share their pain. Mothers, fathers, siblings, and friends spoke of the bright, loving people who were taken from them, their voices trembling with emotion. The defense attempted to shift the narrative, arguing that his actions were the result of a troubled past and untreated mental illness. They painted him as a man driven to the brink by circumstances beyond his control. But their arguments couldn't compete with the overwhelming evidence presented by the prosecution. Outside the courtroom, the public was equally captivated. News outlets ran 24/7 coverage, analyzing every detail of the case. Social media exploded with commentary, debates, and messages of support for the victims' families. The trial became a cultural moment, forcing society to confront the reality of predators hiding in plain sight. After weeks of testimony, the jury reached a unanimous verdict, guilty on all counts. The courtroom erupted in a mix of relief and sorrow. The families hugged one another, tears streaming down their faces, while the husband remained stoic, his mask of indifference unbroken. The trial ended, but its impact was far-reaching. It raised questions about how such crimes could go unnoticed for so long, and what measures could be taken to prevent future tragedies. Could the lessons from this trial create a safer, more vigilant society? The arrest and trial of the husband didn't just expose a predator. It unraveled the fabric of a tight-knit community. The man they had known as a helpful neighbor, the dad who waved from his driveway and shoveled snow in the winter, was revealed to be a calculating murderer. For many, the betrayal was personal. Neighbors, once proud of their close-knit community, found themselves questioning everything. How could they not have seen the signs? Was there something they could have done to stop him? These questions became a painful refrain, leading some to blame themselves while others directed their anger inward, struggling to reconcile the man they thought they knew with the horrifying reality of his actions. The fallout for his family was even more devastating. His wife, who had uncovered his crimes, became a central figure in the story, both as a victim of his deception and as the person who finally ended his reign of terror. But the public's sympathy for her wasn't universal. Some accused her of enabling his crimes, while others questioned how she could have been unaware of his double life. Her children bore the brunt of the community's judgment. Once seen as a happy, well-adjusted family, they now became targets of whispers and stares. Their lives, once filled with routine and stability, were upended as they struggled to reconcile the man they called Dad with the monster described in court. Unable to bear the weight of their shared name, the family left the community, seeking refuge in anonymity. But even in their new lives, they couldn't escape the shadow of his actions. The wife, once a private figure, became an unexpected advocate for victims of violent crime. In interviews and public appearances, she spoke about the importance of trusting one's instincts and recognizing red flags in relationships. The community, too, faced a long road to recovery. The sense of safety that once defined their neighborhood was shattered. People began installing security cameras, joining neighborhood watch programs, and keeping their doors locked even during the day. Trust, once abundant, now felt like a precious commodity. Support groups formed, offering neighbors a space to process their collective trauma. Many found solace in these meetings, realizing they weren't alone in their feelings of betrayal and grief. Slowly, the community began to heal, not by forgetting what happened, but by honoring the victims and committing to vigilance. Though the scars ran deep, the neighborhood refused to let the husband's actions define them. They planted a memorial garden in the local park, a serene space where residents could gather to remember the victims and reflect on the strength they found in unity. Could their resilience serve as a model for other communities facing similar tragedies? The husband's story is a chilling reminder of the darkness that can hide behind the most ordinary facades. For years, he lived a double life, deceiving everyone around him with his charm and normalcy. His ability to mask his true self forced society to confront uncomfortable truths about trust, deception, and the human capacity for evil. Criminologists and psychologists studied his case extensively, analyzing his methods, motives, and psychology. They found a man who thrived on control, who meticulously planned his crimes to avoid detection, and who derived pleasure from the suffering of others. His story became a turning point in the study of criminal behavior, prompting the development of new tools and strategies for identifying predators. His name became synonymous with the dangers of complacency, a cautionary tale taught in classrooms and discussed in law enforcement training programs. But his legacy wasn't defined by his crimes alone. The resilience of his victims' families and the courage of the survivors became the heart of the story. These individuals refused to let his actions define them. They transformed their pain into action, advocating for stronger laws, better communication between law enforcement agencies, and more comprehensive support for victims. Their efforts led to tangible changes, ensuring that future predators would find it harder to operate undetected. The case also left a lasting impact on the community. While the scars would never fully fade, the neighborhood found strength in unity. They established new traditions, like an annual walk to raise awareness for victims of violent crime, ensuring that the memory of those lost would never be forgotten. The lessons from this case continue to resonate far beyond the community. They remind us that evil can hide in the most unexpected places, but so can strength, resilience, and hope. What will we do to ensure that no predator goes unnoticed again? This has been CrimeByte, your portal into the darkest corners of human behavior, where the truths we uncover often feel more chilling than fiction. What would you do if the person you loved turned out to be a monster? It's a question most of us can't fathom, but for some, it becomes an unthinkable reality. The wife in this story didn't just discover her husband's betrayal. She uncovered a legacy of horror that spanned years, countless victims, and unimaginable pain. Her bravery in stepping forward didn't just end a predator's reign. It gave voices to those who could no longer speak and brought closure to families who had spent years waiting for answers. But her story, like so many others, leaves us with more questions than answers. How do we reconcile the love we feel for someone with the horrors they've committed? How do we spot the signs that something is amiss when a predator is as cunning and deceptive as this man was? And perhaps most importantly, how do we ensure that no one else suffers the same fate? Here at CrimeByte, we aim to not only tell these stories, but also learn from them. True crime isn't just about uncovering the horrors of the past. It's about understanding the behaviors, patterns, and red flags that allow predators to operate in plain sight. It's about empowering you, our audience, with the knowledge to recognize danger and take action. The case of this husband is no exception. His story has taught us about the lengths predators will go to maintain their facade, the importance of trusting your instincts, and the resilience of the human spirit in the face of unimaginable betrayal. It's a chilling reminder that evil doesn't always wear a mask. It can sit at the dinner table, laugh with your children, and kiss you goodnight. We know these stories can be difficult to hear. They challenge us to confront the darkness that exists in the world, and sometimes within the people we think we know best. But they're also stories of bravery, justice, and the power of speaking out. They remind us that even in the face of evil, there are those who will fight for the truth and demand accountability. At CrimeByte, we invite you to be part of this journey. We don't just tell these stories, we open a space for dialogue, for questions, and for action. What would you do in her shoes? How would you respond if your world was turned upside down in an instant? These are the questions that keep us coming back, episode after episode, case after case. Join the conversation below. We want to hear your thoughts, your insights, and your reactions. How do we protect our communities from predators who hide in plain sight? What lessons can we take from this case to ensure history doesn't repeat itself? What would you do if the person you love turned out to be your greatest nightmare? Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell to stay updated on our latest episodes. By supporting CrimeByte, you're helping us shine a light on the darkest corners of human behavior and bring justice to those who deserve it.